Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon all. Thanks for joining our session on Africa's transition to green energy for off-grid and mobile-based stations. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to have an engaging session, and we welcome you all to join us throughout the session and also have your questions and engage with us. So to start the program, just for a quick introduction, I am Dilip Tilakaratne. I'm the Senior Market Engagement Manager of the GSMA CleanTech program. And we are very happy to start today's session with a quick overview about the CleanTech program and about the study that we have completed. So over to you, Natalia. Natalia is the head of CleanTech program and AgriTech at GSMA.
Thanks, Dilip, for the introduction, and welcome everyone to this session. It is a very exciting week for us at GSMA because we have our first fully digital event, and at CleanTech team because we have just published an e-report that we will present and launch with you today and get some first hand reactions from the experts in the field about green energy opportunity for off-grid towers that support mobile connectivity in low and middle income countries. I'll start by making sure we're on the same page about who GSMA is and what Mobile for Development is. So you of course know GSMA if you're part of Thrive event, but under GSMA there is a special department called Mobile for Development that is really an implementing arm of our Mobile for Development Foundation that works across all of the SDGs and drives innovation and digital technology to create social impact with the focus on low and middle income countries. We can go to the next slide. That's just to give you a sense of how much we do on the Mobile for Development stream of work. And CleanTech program that is hosting the session is one of the key programs within our portfolio. So specifically for the CleanTech program, we are very new. We're turning 1 year old this week, and we have focused on several topics as we started our work, but they all are united by the climate and environmental agenda. We see our mission as leveraging digital technology as an enabler to transition low and middle income countries to low carbon and climate resilient future. And we work across 3 pillars. So one of them is natural resource management, the climate resilience, and we already published a pioneer and quite groundbreaking report around the role of digital technology and natural resource management. I really recommend you have a look at that, as well as we have a number of shorts as part of the agenda illustrating some of the case studies that we have identified through this research. We also believe that digital technology can enable circular economy in low and middle income countries, and we're very excited to be starting the work on plastics this year to see how plastics can be returned in the economy and reduce the pollution while increasing opportunities for low-income populations to participate in circular economy. And the third pillar is the green energy on which we're going to be zooming in today. So we can go to the next slide, please. And I'll kind of like give you highlights of what we will be discussing today. So as of today, 2020, there are around over 250,000 of off-grid and bad-grid towers in low and middle income countries. And we know that in Africa, it's actually 30% of all towers which are in off-grid or bad-grid areas, and majority of those towers are still powered by non-renewable sources. What it means is that they are run on diesel. So we really are excited to be able to fully estimate the size of the problem, the size of the challenge, or you can call it size of the opportunity going forward as an industry as we transition to low carbon reality. And we also wanted to understand what are the barriers, like why we're still so far behind in terms of our ambitions. to be sustainable industry. We can go to the next slide that kind of shows us what we're going to be talking on about today. So we will start with just a quick run through the objectives and the methodology that we have used to produce this report. We'll talk about the exact size of renewable energy opportunity in low and middle income countries. Interestingly, we'll also zoom into the barriers to transition and opportunities for the switch. Very, very excited that today we're joined by industry practitioners. So we have Orange, TowerXchange, and we have IFC that will comment on our findings, but also offer perspective of their own organizations about how they see the opportunity or how they see the barriers and any call to action they have for the rest of us to make sure that we ensure the transition happens soon and it's in a sustainable way. And most importantly, we hope that we will have time for discussion. And for that, I will encourage everyone as we go through, please put in your questions, not in the chat box, but in the Q&A section. We will moderate that and we'll make sure that we answer most interesting questions. So try to be thoughtful when you answer those. They will have high chances to be asked directly to the participants. You would have noticed it's a live session, so make the most out of it. We can go to the next slide and I'll just set the scene and say, like, we at GSMA are leading industry's agenda in achieving SDGs and proudly doing so. At the same time, we didn't see enough transparency in what exactly is the emission footprint from our industry and why this footprint is as big or as small, because there was not enough data or estimates available to us for the last 5 years. So, and this is exactly why we started this project. We wanted to estimate the size of the problem, map out the renewable energy ecosystem across 3 major regions, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And we conducted a very much in-depth stakeholder study to understand the key barriers that we will discuss with you today. Over to you, Dulip, to quickly run through the methodology. And I will again encourage our audience to be active, participate, ask questions. And I will come in towards the end to moderate the Q&A if we have time left. I hope we will.
Thank you very much, Natalia. And thank you for providing the background for the study and today's session. So as Natalia highlighted, you can see our study had 3 main parts. The first part is looking at the size of the problem. So we created a model that estimated the tower numbers for 2014 and 2020. And then we went into identifying or profiling the 91 LMICs across 3 regions, and then identified 7 representative countries where we had stakeholder interviews and in-depth conversations with key stakeholders to understand what are the key challenges are and what the opportunities are. So we move into the next slide. I'll be very happy to provide you a very high overview of the tower numbers. So you see in 2014, we had around 3.97 million towers, and out of which maybe close to 300,000 of them were placed off-grid. And by 2020, out of the 5.09 million towers in our estimate, we see that 145,000 of them were in bad grid areas, and 198,000 of them are currently still off-grid. And totally maybe around 40,000 of them we estimate are renewably powered, and still there's a large number of towers that's non-renewably powered. In the next slide, I like to give you key highlights. So you can see that 1 million towers have been added in the last 5 to 6 years, out of which 33% of reduction in the off-grid sites and 45% increase in the industry green energy sites. But just a caveat that this also includes the on-grid green energy sites as well. So the key stat I would like you to focus on is out of the off-grid and bad grid sites, we still have 88% of them run on diesel or by non-renewable sources. So that is the major carbon footprint of the industry that we need to change. So why can't we change? What are the barriers? So we go into the next slide to have a highlight of the key barriers that we've highlighted in the report. The first one, we see that the tower sharing model has transformed. There are still challenges around contracting with the key stakeholders, and we also have improved access to electricity grids. So I will tell you why this is important. And then we have two key potential areas, such as small cell sites and also ABC mini grid models that stakeholders have highlighted about. And finally, we look into regulation. So in the next slides, I will take you through each barrier. So the first barrier you will see is the tower sharing model. Globally, if you look at it now, almost 70% of the towers are owned by towercos. And the way mobile operators evaluate the business model on towers and converting to renewable energy versus how towercos would evaluate that is quite different. So I have examples from individual lighthouse countries. So we have Mali. Interestingly, in Mali, we still don't have tower operations, and operators manage the business case and the towers in Mali. Whereas in Uganda, we have around 80% of ownership in towers for towercos. So in Mali, we see a very specific example of Orange owning almost 1,800 towers there, and out of them, 600 of them have been driven into renewable energy. And if you move into Uganda, we see that when working with towercos and MNOs, there is still contracting models that involve energy OPEX that has been passed through to operators. And on the same point, on barrier 2, we are discussing around ESCOs, and energy service companies have the case of being still rather new in the operator's mindset. And because of that, there's no proper pricing, price benchmarking, no contracting model. And in the next slide, you will also see that the ESCOs by 2019, thanks to TowerXchange report, you see that they only are operational in around 50,000 towers, almost similar split between Asia and Africa. And that is across board, it's only 1% of all the towers. So still, it's a growing area, and we are very happy today to have IFC, who's almost completing a study on IFC on how we could support energy service companies in the coming years. In the next barrier, we are going to discuss around energy and the electricity grid. So the electricity grid and rural electrification has grown significantly in the last 5 years. However, but this has still created a doubt in the operator's mind. So when we speak to the operators, we see that if the grid is coming in the next 2 to 3 years, operators are reluctant to go for renewable energy. This is linked to barrier 5. However, what happens is when it comes to the regulation, it's not still strongly implemented to give the operators the encouragement you can still go for off-grid sites. Bangladesh is a good example where we see 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they had around 10% off-grid sites, and now it's only 1%. Still, some of the operators in Bangladesh are reluctant to make that change to renewable energy. In the next slide, in the barrier 4, there are 2 examples, as I mentioned. The first one is on small cell sites. This is a new potential. And you can see a picture of a small cell site managed by Africa Mobile Networks. And interestingly, in DRC, we see they have implemented around 200 plus small cell sites that has 2G, 3G, sometimes 2G plus 3G connection that's purely run by solar energy. And this is low energy, a very rural connectivity, and working very closely on an NAS model, that is network as a service model that's been implemented in few markets. So that might be an option. And secondly, moving into Myanmar on the same slide, we can see that in Myanmar, we see one example of the ABC mini-grid model, probably scaling. So this is Yoma Micropower working closely with Rockefeller Foundation, has created this option of using the mobile tower as the anchor customer and also powering and supporting the customers and businesses around in the area. This model has been seen as a potential many years back, and our sister program, the utilities program, has worked on some of the projects and also reported on them. However, few stakeholders still see that there is potential in this area, and it's a barrier that this hasn't grown. So that's why we highlighted it as barrier 4. And in barrier 5, I mentioned this. In the next slide, you will see that some of the LMICs do have policies, and these net metering and feed-in tariffs have been implemented. However, still they are not really driving or encouraging these operators to move towards that change. So India is an exception where the telecom regulator and the energy ministry drove operators to set targets and work on them, report on them, and you can see the results over the last 6 years, how much Indian operators, non-renewable energy related carbon footprint has changed based on our model. In the next slides, you will see an interesting overview of these issues across the 7 lighthouse countries. And you can see how some of these issues are across board, they are present, and they are kind of challenging operators, and some issues are significant or only present in a couple of markets. And in the next slide, very quickly, I will provide you a high-level overview of the opportunities that we've presented in our report. And these are high-level, as I say, and in the report, we've gone into the next kind of level, but we plan to engage with operators and all you stakeholders on these opportunities to scale them and also to calibrate them to identify which ones are more important for you. And the ground level stakeholders who are speaking to us would be very important in providing insights here. So the 5 opportunities, the first one is looking at strengthening the business case for green energy, internal business case that the operators and towercos are building, standardizing energy contracts and the price benchmarking. The third one looks at data and analysis tools that can support the creation of a business model for the specific tools or specific solutions that we discussed. And the fourth one is looking at whether we can use some of these case studies or replication guides to create industry workshops and work with you guys and use learnings from peer organizations. And finally, looking at how the policy and regulatory dialogue and advice could be set and support operators to work parallelly across. So these are the 5 opportunities. I encourage you to read the report, get more details, and also engage with us. And without taking time, we go into the next slide. So we are very happy to have 3 very strong key stakeholder groups, as Natalia highlighted. We have operator presence, towerco presence, and also from the ESCO interest side, we have IFC. So that's really interesting for me to now curtail my presentation and also invite to Alan. Alan is the Zone Chief Technical and IT Officer for Orange in Middle East and Africa. And he's also the lead of the TREE program that stands for Towards Responsible and Efficient Energy. And this is the program that works towards setting targets for the group for 2025. So we are very happy and proud to have you, Alan. Over to you.
Thank you, Dilip. Just to precise, this program is for Orange MEA. It's not for Orange Group. At the group size, we have other initiatives, but we have this one for Orange Middle East and Africa. So the target is to reach 50% of renewable energy in 2025 at group level. And the TREE program is aiming to improve for all the country of Middle East and Africa where Orange is present. this ratio. So we have defined this program. So maybe we can move to the next slide, in which we have 8 initiatives. The first one is to implement an ESCO everywhere it is possible for all eligible sites. Today we have 8 ESCO implemented over 17 operations. The second one is to improve the PU of our data center. We have many data centers, usually there are PUE, meaning efficiency of usage of the power, can be really optimized and improved. The third one is to modernize our network, the technical environment, where it makes sense. Where we don't have ESCO, for example, we need to have a rectifier of newer generation. And the fourth one is to deploy energy cost insurance, because sometimes there is many studies where we could reduce our costs with a national company, for example, just by checking our bill. So this is something we try to implement. The fifth one is to implement the RAN grid features. Our suppliers are making great effort to implement green features in their equipment, and we have seen that sometimes it's not implemented in the countries. So it's really key to take advantage of these features. The sixth one is to implement for the data center that we have, or the social HQ, to put some solar panels to be able to produce our energy directly for us and reduce our cost. The seventh one is a solar farm implementation. We have already 3 in Jordan, and we are working hard to implement more today in 5 countries, but the regulation is a key issue. And the 8th one is a radio unit optimization, to be able to manage 2G and 4G, for example, on the same radio units, to avoid multiplication of radio unit on the pylon. Next slide, please. So the next step, because this program is running since 2019, is to review all the new initiatives that we can have with our main technical direction, to see if we can improve this program with new initiative. To set renewable energy ratio for each affiliate, because some are already at 60–70% of renewable energy. If we take Jordan, for example, with a solar farm, but others are much lower. And then one point is really to lobby to enable solar farm in all countries, because in Africa and Middle East, we have the opportunity to take advantage of the sun, which is maybe not the same case in Europe. So it's we really need to develop this. And we pursue the collaboration with ESCO and TowerCo to improve energy quality, stability, and the green factor, which today is embarked in our ESCO contract, and not yet in all our TowerCo contracts, which is a pity, because we believe we could collaborate more on this issue with the TowerCo company. And then to try to find an innovative business model to be able to work more on solar in linked with the regulation opportunities. That's for me, the tip, I think.
Thank you very much, Alan, and thank you for the insightful presentation on Orange's MEA initiatives. And we move quickly to the next slide and next presenter. So over to you, Matt, or Matthew Edwards, is the head of research in EMEA for TowerXchange, and he's been a very strong partner and supporter of our project and the report. So over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Dulip. Thank you very much for having us at the show. Best of luck with your first digital event. If we go on to the next slide. TowerXchange is the world's telecom tower journal of record and community host. So as you can see, we track all the world's telecom towers, who owns them and what happens to them. Our count is slightly different to the GSMA's count. We have a slightly different methodology where the GSMA develop models, look at tower counts and go from there, whereas we have a more simple methodology where we phone people up and collect information. So there's some differences in numbers there. And we focus very much on the passive infrastructure, so whether that's M&A deals or O&M contracts. Until earlier this year, we also ran events, although we've not been able to connect our community since January this year. We're still running digital events, and that's one of the reasons we're involved, some of the new initiatives which we've launched. So I'd urge you to consider attending one of our events next month, TowerXchange Meetup Africa Borderless. But that's, I'll speak more about that later. So if we move on to the next slide, please. In the industry, we cover 3 categories of organisations are responsible for emissions, and each is taking steps to reduce their carbon emissions, especially in Africa. There's towercos, mobile network operators, and ESCOs. Towercos have historically been a major accidental driver of decarbonisation, and recently have been a larger intentional driver of decarbonisation. I say accidentally because the early towerco model wasn't much concerned with emissions reductions, but by reducing power and infrastructure, whether that's less steel in the air or fewer diesel generators at sites, towercos helped reduce emissions, and now they are doing more to intentionally reduce emissions, where that coincides with reducing total cost of ownership of energy assets. So in India, we've seen tens of thousands of sites being solarized, as the GSMA's report showed, where the incentives were in place. But even in Africa, where the incentives are less direct, as in India, you're still seeing organisations like American Tower spending tens of millions of pounds on green technologies, and the same with Helios or IHS towers. They are spending and solarizing and adding lithium-ion batteries to hundreds of thousands of sites. And Africa probably is the continent where towercos can have the biggest role in greening the network, just because of the importance of distributed generation in Africa. In some markets, towercos are holding back from investing in distributed generation because the grid is getting closer and closer to their sites, whereas in Africa they're really having to take the initiative. One thing I'd point out, and you can see it quite clearly on this slide, is that not all towercos manage power. In the Americas, towercos tend to manage steel and access, and the energy equipment sits with the mobile network operators. That's why you can see American Tower USA or Vertical Bridge going carbon neutral. That's not to say there's no emissions related with that telecom site. It's just that the emissions are owned and managed by the mobile network operator. If you look to Asia, you look to Africa, where towercos are managing power, you can see some quite substantial carbon emissions per tower. And that's where you can really help. They can really make a difference by shifting away from on-site diesel generators and towards renewables and grid power. So thinking about who owns those emissions is really important. We can move on to the next slide. Dulip spoke about these guys. ESCOs, energy service companies, are really becoming larger and larger players. From essentially a proof of concept 5-6 years ago, they're now managing 50,000 sites. They crossed that threshold a year earlier than we expected, and we think they should be managing around 100,000 sites within the next 5 years. That is, 1-2% of total telecom sites, but of their addressable market of bad grid and off-grid sites, they'll be approaching 10% or more by 20% by the middle part of the decade. And you've seen a change in who is being successful as ESCOs. We tracked around 20-25 different companies 2-3 years ago, and now you're really seeing, at least within Africa, 4 or 5 companies really dominant, who are able to combine the financing of the energy assets, the expertise in the site design and the energy design for the site, and also the operational expertise, able to manage the sites, maintain them properly. But I'm sure we're going to hear more about that from both Alan and Ariana later. If we move on to the next slide, Mobile network operators are really driving this, and Orange have done really great work in Middle East and Africa to push renewables up the agenda. You have mobile network operators raising capital through green bonds. Much of that is going towards data centers, which are incredibly power hungry, but a large amount is going towards investments in network infrastructure as well, especially towers and replacing diesel generators. You have some mobile operators setting renewables targets, so Orange within Africa, but you also have some around Europe, Asia, and the Americas. And you're also having mobile network operators setting themselves targets by date. So whether that is an emissions target, a renewable energy target, or an ambition to become carbon neutral. If we move on to the next slide. So what TowerXchange doing to support this? As I said, we're no longer running face-to-face events. We plan to return next year with them, but we've taken this as an opportunity to help bring people together to talk about these issues more directly. The digital format's really good for this because the TowerCo world can be a very physically rooted industry with towers, where they are, but the lessons are really transcontinental, and there's lots we can learn from one another. There's lots around economic regulation we can learn from India, and obviously there's just some fantastic work keeping sites going in really difficult situations, for example in the DRC. What we're doing is running Greening the Network. It's a series of live events, but it's also a research series and a collection of industry executives who discuss things regularly. We'll be doing more of these events next year. The next one of these is taking place at TowerXchange Meetup Africa, which if you turn to the next slide, we have here. It's happening on the 13th to 14th of October, and we have a whole day dedicated to green energy innovation, how to design sites for new applications of technology, how to upgrade existing sites, the role of ESCOs in modernising energy equipment across Africa, as well as a whole host of other things. So I hope you'll be able to join us. Look for TowerXchange Meetup Africa online. And I want to say as well, it's not just the events. We're going to be looking at different ways that we can collate information for industry, share that online, and make sure that everyone is pulling in the same direction, because there are really important lessons in different markets where we can help one another. And I'll stop that presentation there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you for your insightful presentation on TowerXchange and also reactions to the GSMA study. We move to the next slide, and also I'm very happy to welcome Ariana Batori, and she is the Global Sector Lead for Broadband and Tesco Investments. And as I mentioned, she's also leading almost a parallel research on ESCOs. So we are very excited to have you, Ariana. Over to you.
Thank you, Dulip. Good afternoon and good evening, I think, to most participants on the line. I'm really happy to be with you today and to share a bit of what we do at IFC, and also echo some of the findings of the recent GSMA study and what's been said earlier by Alan and Matt. A very high level overview of IFC for those of you who may not be familiar. We are essentially a development financial institution, part of the World Bank Group. And what we do is we provide debt and equity investment and advisory services to companies in emerging markets. If we go to the next slide, what we do here is basically an overview of IFC's investments in digital infrastructure. This is a space we have been active in since the 90s, basically as soon as the telecom markets started liberalizing. Our very first clients were, of course, the mobile network operators. You see here in the first column kind of our cumulative investments for MNOs to the magnitude of $7 billion. Subsequently, as the telecom industry evolved and MNOs started outsourcing some of the infrastructure, we also moved with that, and we financed a lot of the tower companies. I think most of them in Africa have been or are our clients at the moment. Thirdly, we do finance a lot of broadband operators. For us, broadband is really any type of company that provides connectivity services. We are technology agnostic, so whether that is through satellite, undersea, or terrestrial networks, it's really a good fit with our mandate, and we are more than happy to support that. And the fourth pillar here would be data centers and cloud investments. Our investments to date have been mainly on the equity side. That's why you see the volumes not being as big as some of the debt transactions in the other verticals. And on the right-hand side of this chart are two areas that are very, very dear to our hearts. One of them that I personally lead on ESCOs, energy services companies that provide services to telecom anchor clients. And in the upcoming slides, I will talk a little bit more about our efforts in that area. But just to complete the high-level overview, at the bottom here, I included a little bit of a breakdown of where Africa sits in terms of our global commitment to the telecom sector. It is quite an important region for us, of strategic importance, and one where we want to do a lot more. And at the very bottom, you can see a map of Africa. I hope it's not cut off on my screen. It's a little bit cut off. But the message here is that IFC has offices in a lot of African countries there. When we do not have offices, we have regional coverage and also a lot of support from our global teams in Washington, D.C. So Africa for us is really a key priority. If we move to the next slide, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that the partnership with GSMA for us has been a long-standing relationship, and we're really excited to be part of this launch event today. It is an effort. We actually started together in 2014 when we launched the first report on green power for mobile. And I'm really happy that the GSMA decided to take that and do an update of it and additional analysis and summarize it all in this 2020 report on achieving low carbon energy solutions for mobile connectivity. I hope you all get a copy of it and read it. I think one thing that is extremely relevant for Africa is to mention that there are significant regional differences. So even when we talk about the total number of off-grid and bad-grid sites, and we try to aggregate everything into kind of a global trend, we may be missing out on the fact that we do see actually opposing trends. So while markets like India, for example, are making tremendous progress on electrification, in Africa, for now, telecom networks grow much faster than the grid can, which means that we have an issue today with bad grid and off-grid sites, and we can expect this issue to become a little bit worse in years to come. So to me, I'm really heartened to hear the messages here from the panel echoing the fact that some action is needed, and sooner rather than later. And I'm really excited to see an operator's view and a view from the industry, and hopefully a view from us as an investor and from the GSMA echoing the same thing. If we move to the next slide. This is way too much information to expect any of you to read it, but the message here is that for each of the 5 key hurdles identified in the GSMA report, from the IFC side, we do have a work stream that addresses that directly. And one of these work streams is a study that we are just about completing. And I think many of you in the audience may have already engaged with us on it, the GSMA and TowerXchange, and Orange certainly have. It is basically an analysis of the addressable market for ESCOs, meaning largely the off-grid and the bad-grid sites in emerging markets. Second, it is an analysis of what are those conditions at the individual market level which make a country attractive for this type of business model. And that can be, you know, regulatory in nature, or it can be commercial, technical, structure of the market, etc. And lastly, I think that the third big topic that we're looking into is the relationship between the mobile operators, the tower companies, and these ESCOs. There are, among the hurdles identified in the GSMA report, all of them really resonate with us. On the standardization of contracts, it is an issue, we also see it, and we will tackle it in the report as well. We have been asking for views from the industries and collating that into a set of conclusions. On small cells, we have a platform dedicated to that, looking into applications in emerging markets, so really excited for that work too. And on the enabling environment, this is also extremely important, both for the telecom and for the energy sectors, and this is where our colleagues at the World Bank can really help with the dialogue with governments. If we move to the next slide, I think I already covered this. It's basically one additional thing to mention is that in terms of timeline, we are expecting this to be completed by sometime in October. We are working with colleagues from Brown and Berger on this analysis. And I'm hoping that at least in the next 2 weeks, by the time the TowerXchange event comes up, we'll be able to share a bit more. And most definitely, we can plan for an industry convening event sometime in the future so that we can share a few more views on this. The next slide, I think, touches on a few of the related work streams. I mentioned earlier the focus from IFC on Africa. Within that, rural connectivity is an absolute priority for us. And we are looking at it from multiple angles and trying to make it work, again, technology agnostic, whether it's satellites or whether it's small cells, ESCOs, any type of business model which can make rural connectivity commercially sustainable, it is of interest to us. And you may be hearing from us with similar engagements like the one for the Tesco market, where we are hoping to, again, collate everyone's views, add our own, and hopefully come up with a few solutions that we can all, as investment banks, hopefully finance, and as operators, work together to structure. I think my time is almost up, so I will probably stop here. Dulip, over to you, and thank you all very much for having me and for listening today.
Sure. Thanks very much, Ariana, and thanks for the very exciting presentation that provides us the opportunity as well. So maybe very quickly we move into our Q&A session, and I would like to have to start up the Q&A session with very quick questions from each of you, and we'll try to take at least 1 or 2 questions from the audience on the Q&A. But if you have time, the speakers will try to type in answers where possible as well, because I see we only have 17 minutes in the session. So very quickly, I'll move to Alan for my first question. Thanks very much for the encouraging presentation that highlighted how in detail and in depth that operators look into renewable energy targets. So when concerning Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa as a region, can you tell us like what is the key challenge when it comes to achieving your targets, and how you see maybe GSMA or TowerXchange or IFC can help Orange in that in reaching this target?
Thank you, Dulip. I think that it's not specific to Africa, but the cost of solutions and the long return on investment is one of the most difficult points to invest a lot in renewable energy. Even though it's improving, so the prices are decreasing, and so we can now, I think, maybe more invest than before. One point also maybe is the accessibility of sites, which increase a lot the cost to build a site and either pylon with solar panels. So this is maybe one specificity of Africa. When you look to RDC, for example, to reach a site is you have to take a plane, a boat, whatever. So it's something difficult. And the other challenge is regulatory, I think, issues. As we look for solar farm, for example, this part is something that should be improved to be a success in terms of solar farm deployments. So coming to your second question about how it could be supported. Well, for solar farm, for example, could have a financing issue because it's a big project with huge investment, and some MNO has sometimes capex constraints, so financing can be something very useful. And in terms of GSMA or TowerXchange, maybe we can support MNO and TowerCo to better cooperate each other as partner. I think it's what has been done, for example, on national roaming or rent sharing with GSMA, playing a strong role of facilitator. Sometimes I think it can be a good thing that we are involved in those discussions between MNO and TowerCo, for example.
Thanks very much, Ellen. And quickly to you, Matt. And thanks for highlighting about your initiative or the effort on greening the network. Congratulations on starting such an initiative and driving that. So my question would be specifically on one area, one finding, one barrier that we discussed. So we see that the legacy issues around contracting and issues around price benchmarking are key challenges that we'll come across in our interviews. So is there a plan in the greening network to address some of these challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really big issue for the telco industry at most levels there. We have another working group on data collection and utilization, and what we've done in that work group, very similar to greening the network, but slightly advanced in terms of time, is we've produced a matrix which helps assess what services each of the different technology providers offer, so that people can understand who does what, how the whole ecosystem fits together, because it's the sort of intelligent infrastructure model is something relatively new to TowerCos, and we've done quite a lot to sort of help clarify what can be quite a confusing ecosystem. And we'd like to do something similar in the power world, whether that's sort of coming up with more price standards for different sorts of technology, pricing for different technologies in different areas, or for contractual terms. We have some work streams looking at that. There's some of that knowledge exists in the larger TowerCos from their own investigations, and we'd like to get them to share that more with some of the smaller, newer operators. But I think that's a really important way that we can push things forward, is just to help standardize and make some of these decisions easier for some of the TowerCos investing and the mobile network operator power teams. We don't need to keep sort of reinventing the wheel, and we can move forward, I think, on this.
Great, thanks, Matt. And very quickly over to you, Ariana. I know you are planning to kind of publish your report later in a few weeks' time, but is there a possibility for you to share like a very quick, like kind of sneak peek on what the key challenges are you've seen on the ESCO side, and whether there are like parallels you see in this report as well?
Sure. Happy to advance a few thoughts. If we focus on the African context in particular, I think on the market side, the opportunity is there. I spoke a little bit about this earlier. Of all the regions, this is where the number of off-grid and back-grid sites is still expected to grow. So I think there is a recognition of this fact, at least. Then I think on the technical side, most of the barriers have been overcome, I would say. Technology has evolved a lot, even in terms of battery storage. There's so many solutions now that make the green power solutions more viable than before. And on the commercial side, I think this is still a little bit of a work in progress in my view. I think some of the buy-in is there, but we still need to do work on it. So from my point of view, the biggest challenge is basically on the implementation side. So if we all agree that there is a need to act and we all agree that it makes sense to go green, then okay, how do we do it? And what I see with a challenge for ESCOs at the moment is dealing with a little bit of this lack of standardization for the contracts. I think many of the mobile operators are coming from their experience with tower companies and seeking to build into these contracts a lot of the lessons learned on that front. The balance here is to make sure that as we structure these ESCO contracts, they are also bankable, because what we want is for these ESCOs to be able to attract the capital in order for them to deliver on their SLAs, deliver on the speed of upgrades and network. Everything that they need to do requires CapEx investment, right? So that investment will come on the back of the contract. So for me, the focus on getting as soon as possible to a common understanding of what are the key terms that should be in those contracts would really go a long way in helping all of the stakeholders, giving the MNOs the visibility that they are signing a contract with a company that will be able to deliver, because they will be able to access capital. For the ESCOs, same thing. They want to be able to know that the risk distribution between themselves and the operator is in a balanced place. And for investors, as you can imagine, extremely important, because the key thing they will be looking at is that contract. So to me, the implementation, and within the area of implementation, the structure of these contracts is really key.
Thank you very much, Ariana. So we did manage to save about 7 minutes for Q&A from participants. Over to you, Natalia, to manage us for the 7 minutes.
That's going to be tough. I can only say thank you so much to those of you panelists that already answered some of the questions in written. And there's been some really good questions about the security and whether we able to kind of reduce the security risks by replacing diesel, because it is quite well known that diesel theft can amount to a very high percentage of the costs in energy cost overall for running rural stations. And interestingly, Alan, you commented that you know, with solar it's not so much of a problem, and I think as GSMA we experimented with the options where actually communities can benefit from maybe some of the excess power as well, so the value the solar, but the batteries are so valuable, like that they are the first to disappear. So there is an ongoing challenge there with security, which has not yet been fully solved. There are some other questions which are not being answered, and there are so many, and I think I'll try to ask the ones that are very quick and maybe can give us the most kind of tick boxes. So the first one is to Ariana. I think you talking about IFC role, but you also talk about how the contracts for renewable energy for telecom towers should be bankable. So maybe could you clarify the role of IFC? Do you see yourselves as financier in this situation, or do you see yourself as somebody who can kind of facilitate financial players more broadly and educating them around the opportunity? Because we are getting questions around, you know, like what's the process and criteria to get IFC financing if I want to transition from bad grid and off-grid sites to renewables? So would I go to IFC? Would I go to the bank with your backing? Like, can you clarify your role in terms of working with the industry players?
Sure, happy to. So our role is to do financing, right? So we provide financing, and we also provide advisory services, and we also provide project development support. So there's kind of three legs to this. If a project is ready to be financed today and the mobile network operator is ready to sign a contract, be it with a telco, with an ESCO, and we can fund either of these three parties, we would be more than happy to do that, and we have in the past. If the project is still kind of on a pilot basis and the parties are trying to figure out whether it makes sense, how to do it, what we've done in other markets is that we actually supported kind of pilots, I would say, in order to demonstrate the business case and convince everybody around the table that it makes sense or not. So we can actually get involved at the early stages of these projects and help build the business case. And lastly, there is also the type of industry engagement that we do through the report that I mentioned. And this is just meant to complement our direct financing and our advisory services. This is kind of advocacy work, if you will, and a public good meant to, again, facilitate this dialogue between all parties. The bread and butter of what IFC does, of course, remains financing, and I would be more than happy to discuss directly with anybody that is interested, the specific steps and criteria. I think my email address was listed there, and I would be really happy to discuss that offline.
Thanks, Ariana. I think that's really amazing to have this door open to IFC after this session to our audience. And one last quick question, and I'll address it to Matthew. So since you are embarking on this greening initiative, can you comment on the feasibility of wind? Because we are always kind of focused on solar, and even Alan's presentation was heavily focused on the solar solutions. So from your work with ESCOs, is this a solution that they are considering in the mix or as a standalone?
So I've recently spoken with a wind power company, and there are a few wind power companies sponsoring the Africa event. And some of them are still at proof of concept stage, others have live wind. So one of the companies involved has 400 hybrid sites with wind installed. And so I think wind is beginning to be seen as more of a proven technology. There are a number of difficulties about installing wind. It's not always appropriate depending on the wind at the location. You may not have space on site for a wind turbine to be installed. You may not have space on your tower to install a wind turbine on your tower. The profile of generation is different to that of solar, so they complement one another. And it's a more proven technology. You know, wind has been producing electricity for decades, and there is not much that goes wrong with a wind turbine. So I definitely think there is a role for it in the future. It is for most towercos still and ESCOs still in proof of concept phase. And I don't think the industry as a whole knows which sites it suits best and how you deploy it at scale. But I think it will be an increasing part of it as a complement to other technologies.
That's great. I think that's fantastic to end the conversation on kind of the note that not even all the opportunities have been explored. And as Ariana says, even the ones we know are becoming more commercially viable. And there are still these teething issues around how we structure engagement and some of the legacy we're carrying with us. And sometimes it's regulation and the availability of space. And sometimes regulation also dictates what space you can use and cannot use. And there is just a lot of complexities in the space. But from our perspective, we're just so excited that we managed to have all the key stakeholders on the same page, finally, around the key kind of barriers, as well as the size of the opportunity, or we can call it the road we still need to walk together. So I'll hand over to Dulip for a closing of the session and the call to action. And on behalf of the GSMA, massive thank you to the speakers. You've been amazing. And thank you for your participation, questions, honesty, being open to follow up with our audience, and also being active in the Q&A. And we hope to be part of your future events very soon. And Dulip, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you all for very active participation and also very insightful presentations. I'll take you through the call to action or the next steps very quickly. You can see it on the slide. The report is online. Please go ahead and download, and you can also, as I mentioned in the start, we are looking at an industry kind of working group to work with us to identify these opportunities and look at where we can support or work more closely. So please reach out to us. This is our team's email address, and you also can see our newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter as well. And we look forward to working very closely with our partners who are here today and all the others who are online. So once again, a very, very big thank you for all the support, and we look forward, we use this as a starting point for larger engagement. So thanks all, good evening, good night, and good day.